At some point in recent weeks, the United States positioned aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean Sea. Israel launched attacks against Iranian soil. Iran responded with more than 300 drones and missiles in a single night. The world came closer to a world war than it had in decades, and almost no one noticed that this exact sequence, this specific hatred between these specific peoples, was predicted in a tent in the desert of Canaan 4,000 years ago, when two brothers were separated, and God said something about their future that has still not finished coming to pass. There is a specific verse, a single sentence spoken by an angel to an Egyptian slave woman in the middle of the desert, recorded in the 16th chapter of the book of Genesis, which describes with a precision that should be impossible the exact pattern of conflict you see in today's news. Not as metaphor, not as forced religious interpretation, as a factual, verifiable, word-for-word description of a behavior that has been repeating itself for 4 millennia. You will reach that verse, and when you do, you will understand why 4,000 years of wars, treaties signed before the cameras of the entire world, redrawn borders, and historic peace agreements have not been enough to erase what was planted on a desert morning. But before you get there is a second irony kept at the center of this story, an irony so precise and so disturbing that most modern geopolitical analyses prefer to ignore it. The country that today declares as official state policy that its sacred objective is to destroy Israel, Iran, the Islamic Republic, the greatest financier of armed groups in the Middle East, was once the greatest protector the Jewish people had ever had in all of their history, a protector mentioned by name in a prophetic text written 150 years before it even existed. You will understand that too. But the beginning is not in 1948. It is not in 1979. The beginning lies in a nomad's tent in the desert of Canaan, where a man named Abraham made a decision that God had not asked for, and for which the world is still paying the price. Put into perspective what it means to be called by God in a world that did not know God. There was no Bible. There was no consolidated monotheistic tradition, no temple, no priest, no established ceremony of worship to the one God. There was a man of 75 years, living in Ur of the Chaldeans, a prosperous city-state on the banks of the Euphrates River in what is today southern Iraq, surrounded by clay idols and bronze figures dedicated to the Sumerian pantheon. And then a voice, an impossible command. Go from your country, from your family, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. And a promise without precedent in religious history. Up to that moment, I will make of you a great nation. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Abraham went. He left Ur, crossed Haran in what is today southern Turkey, descended through Syria, crossed the limestone hills of Canaan with cattle, servants, and possessions, and settled in a land of chalky hills, of summers that crack the earth into fissures, and winters of rain just sufficient to grow wheat, but never sufficient to bring comfort. A crossroads land, Egypt to the south, Mesopotamia to the northeast, the Mediterranean to the west. And time passed, week after week, season after season, and the promise of a great nation remained a promise. How long can you wait for something God said would happen? Abraham was 86 years old when the text records one of the most consequential decisions in human history. Sarai, his wife, had an Egyptian slave named Hagar, and Sarai proposed, "The Lord has prevented me from giving birth. I pray you, go in to my maidservant. Perhaps I shall obtain children through her." And Abraham listened. Who was Hagar? The biblical text never fully answers, and that incompleteness is itself significant. She was Egyptian, she was a slave, she was a woman. In the world of 4,000 years ago, those three conditions together placed a person in the most vulnerable position that existed. She was not consulted, she was not asked, there was no law to protect her. And what she felt when she was given as a second wife to the most powerful patriarch in Canaan, the text does not say. But what came afterward reveals a woman who carried within herself a dignity that no slavery had erased. Hagar conceived, and upon perceiving that she had conceived, she began to despise Sarai. What was happening in that tent was an explosive reconfiguration of power. A slave now carried what the mistress could not have. Sarai went to Abraham. Abraham spoke one of the most passive lines in the entire biblical narrative. "Your maidservant is in your hand. Do with her as it pleases you." And Sarai afflicted Hagar, so much so that Hagar fled. The dry heat of the Negev desert was at her back, the kind of heat that cracks lips into fissures, that makes the skin on the forehead burn like scorched leather, that makes the midday air almost impossible to breathe, the red, chalky dust rising with every step. The silence of the desert broken only by the hot wind. Hagar was pregnant. She was alone. She was fleeing toward nowhere. It was at a spring of water on the road to Shur that the angel of the Lord found her. Not an angel appearing to a king in a palace, not a vision given to a prophet in a formal ceremony. The angel of the Lord went into the desert to find a fugitive slave woman, pregnant, without power, without status, without a name that mattered to any scribe in any kingdom. And he asked a question, "Where have you come from and where are you going?" And after hearing her answer, said something that would change the course of the entire world's history. First, a command: return to your mistress and submit yourself to her. Then a promise: I will so greatly multiply your descendants that they cannot be numbered. And then a name for the son not yet born. You shall call his name Ishmael, which in Hebrew means God hears, because the Lord has heard your affliction. And here is the verse that was promised at the beginning. The prophecy you need to hear with full attention, because it is the most precise and verifiable description of the pattern of conflict the Middle East has known for 4 millennia. The angel said of Ishmael, "He will be a wild man, like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brothers." 4,000 years, 1 sentence, 3 clauses, and each one still verifiable in today's news. His hand will be against everyone. The pattern of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of the Houthis, of every armed faction that lives by conflict, that defines itself through conflict, that only exists as long as the conflict exists. And everyone's hand against him. The international siege, the sanctions, the peace agreements that systematically excluded, the constant pressure from all sides on every people that claims the heritage of Ishmael. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brothers. Every internal fracture in what is called the Arab world. Every time the descendants of Ishmael divide among themselves while the declared target is someone else. Every separate agreement with Israel that tears apart the supposedly united front. The loop is fulfilled. But the story still has 4,000 years ahead of it. Hagar returned. Ishmael was born. Abraham was 86 years old. 13 years passed. 13 years in which Ishmael grew up as the only son, as the firstborn, as the presumed heir of the most important man in Canaan. And then God spoke to Abraham again and announced, Sarah would give birth to a son, and that son would be the heir of the covenant. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Sarah was 90. The text acknowledges the biological absurdity without trying to soften it. Sarah had laughed when she heard the promise, a laugh of disbelief that the narrative does not condemn, but simply records. And the name Isaac, in Hebrew Yitzhak, means exactly that. He laughs. The son who should have been biologically impossible carried in his very name the human laugh in the face of the impossible. Ishmael was 13 years old when his brother was born. He was the adolescent who had grown up believing himself heir to everything, and suddenly there was a baby in the tent that changed that equation completely. The moment of rupture is in Genesis chapter 21, on the day that Isaac was weaned, a celebration that marked the child's survival through the first, most deadly years of life. Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac. It does not matter exactly what happened. What matters is what Sarah said to Abraham: "Cast out this slave woman and her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." The text is explicit about what Abraham felt. The matter was very displeasing in Abraham's eyes on account of his son. On account of his son, Ishmael, not Isaac, the son who was about to be lost. But God spoke, and what he said carries a clinical coldness that reveals the precision of divine purpose. "Do not be displeased on account of the boy. In Isaac shall your offspring be called. But I will also make a nation of the son of the slave woman, because he is your offspring." Abraham rose early in the morning. That phrase always marks the same thing in the context of the patriarch's obedience. He did what had to be done without procrastinating, without negotiating, without seeking a third way that would spare the cost. He gave bread and a skin of water to Hagar. He placed the child in her arms, and he sent them away into the desert of Beersheba. The skin of water ran out. What goes through the mind of a mother who hears her son asking for water and has nothing more to give, who watches the child weaken in the unforgiving heat? Hagar laid Ishmael under a bush, the only bush in that stretch of arid land, went and sat down at a distance the text describes as a bowshot away, and said aloud, "Let me not look on the death of the child." And she lifted up her voice and wept. This is the human cost that narratives of empires and prophecies frequently swallow without chewing. The smell of dry sweat on skin, the heat that enters through every pore and dries from the inside out, the silence of the desert that does not answer, a mother 30 meters from her son dying of thirst, far enough not to have to witness the exact moment. And God heard. The text specifically records that God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel called to Hagar from heaven, "What ails you? Do not fear. God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Rise up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. Ishmael lived, and so did the hatred. Not Ishmael's hatred specifically. The text does not describe him as a bitter or resentful man. It says God was with him, that he grew up in the desert of Paran, in the northwest region of the Arabian Peninsula, that he became a skilled archer. His mother took for him a wife from Egypt, and Ishmael had 12 sons, exactly as had been promised, 12 princes. 12 tribes spread across the region, stretching from what is today southern Syria to northeastern Saudi Arabia. What the archaeological records and Arabic genealogies preserved by more than 20 centuries of oral transmission show is that from those 12 tribes, from Kedar specifically, the second son of Ishmael, mentioned in Assyrian records from the 8th century before Christ, there runs a genealogical line that travels approximately 25 generations to a man born in Mecca around the year 570 of the Christian era. That man's name was Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the founder of Islam. Can you grasp the weight of that? Islam, which today counts approximately 1,900,000,000 faithful, nearly a quarter of the total population of the planet, traces its spiritual identity to the son expelled from Abraham's tent, to the boy placed under a bush in the desert with an empty skin of water. The sentence spoken in that desert to a weeping slave woman, "I will make him a great nation," was fulfilled on a scale no human being in that moment could have imagined. And here is the detail that changes everything. Islam is not a religion that ignores Abraham. Islam claims Abraham, Ibrahim in Arabic, as the original patriarch of the true faith. The Kaaba in Mecca The black cube, toward which 1,900,000,000 people turn 5 times a day in prayer, is associated in Islamic tradition with its construction by Ibrahim himself and his son Ishmael. The Quran mentions Ibrahim in more than 60 passages. The conflict between the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael is not merely political or territorial. It is a conflict over who is the legitimate heir of Abraham's promise. And that question has no human resolution available because the answer each side gives is inscribed in the theological foundation of its identity. The expansion that followed the death of Muhammad in 632 was of a speed without parallel in the military history of the ancient world. In less than 100 years, the Islamic Caliphate had conquered the entire Arabian Peninsula, Egypt, all of North Africa, Persia with its millennium of civilization, the Levant, parts of India, and had reached the south of France. It was at the gates of Tours and Poitiers when it was stopped by Charles Martel in 732. In the battle that many historians consider to have saved Western Christendom. In less than 100 years, a speed that no previous model of military expansion had produced. And then the Crusades. Between 1095, when Pope Urban II preached at Clermont that every Christian who went to the Holy Land would have his sins forgiven, and 1291, when the last Crusaders were expelled from Acre. 196 years of systematic conflict for control of the same land promised to Isaac 3,000 years before. The First Crusade took Jerusalem in July of 1099. The massacre that followed was described by chroniclers of the time, both Christian and Muslim, as something that disturbed even the standards of violence of that century. Saladin reconquered the city in October of 1187, and notably with clemency, because he calculated that a merciful reconquest would build more lasting legitimacy than blood. Then came 623 years of the Ottoman Empire, from 1299 to 1922. Longer than the United States has existed, multiplied by more than 2, the Ottoman Empire controlled the greater part of the Middle East, including all of the land that would become Israel. At the height of Ottoman power, under Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire governed approximately 25 million people, perhaps a fifth of the world's population at that time. What does it mean for two peoples to live 623 years under the same political structure that acknowledges their identity but does not consider them sovereign? It means that when that structure was removed, the pressure that had been dammed up for 6 centuries found no organized release valve. It simply exploded. The dissolution of the Ottoman Empire after the First World War resolved none of the accumulated tensions. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, negotiated in secret between France and Britain while both were promising independence to the Arabs who fought on their side, divided the Middle East according to criteria of colonial convenience that bore little relation to the ethnic, tribal, and religious identities of the peoples of those lands. The borders of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, these are borders that the world still calls unstable 100 years later, because unstable was how they were drawn. And meanwhile, in Europe, the project of systematic extermination of the Jewish people was escalating in a progression the world would have preferred to notice sooner. Between 1933 and 1945, the apparatus of the Third Reich carried out the systematic murder of approximately 6 million European Jews. 2/3 of all those living on the continent, gas chambers, mass shootings, death marches in the Polish winter. The smell of smoke that villagers around the camps described decades later as something that entered the bones and never came out. 6 million. When the survivors arrived in what was then British Mandate Palestine, they were not abstract colonizers arriving in an empty land. They were the last remnants of a people that had been systematically attempted to be erased from the map. And they came to the only place that their 3,000-year tradition called home, the same land promised to Isaac, the same land for which the Crusades bled for 196 years. On the 14th of May, 1948, David Ben-Gurion read the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. 11 minutes later, the United States recognized the new state. And on the following day, literally the next day, the armies of 5 Arab nations crossed their borders: Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Lebanon. A nation 48 hours old was in an existential war. Israel won. Against all calculations, it won again in 1967, in exactly 6 days of combat, tripling in size. It won in 1973, when Egypt and Syria attacked on Yom Kippur and nearly destroyed it before it could mobilize its reserves. And then came Iran. To understand modern Iran, you need to understand ancient Iran. And here is the second irony kept since the beginning of this narrative, the one that most geopolitical analyses prefer not to mention. In the year 538 before Christ, King Cyrus II, Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, ruler of Persia, which corresponds to what is today Iran, conquered Babylon. And what he did afterward stands among the most extraordinary actions of any ruler of antiquity. He freed all the peoples deported by the Babylonians, including the Jews, who had been in captivity for 48 years. Not only did he free them, he arranged for them to return with the gold and silver vessels of the temple, and he financed the rebuilding of Jerusalem. The detail that changes the scale of everything. The prophet Isaiah, writing around 720 before Christ, more than 150 years before Cyrus was born, mentioned this king by his specific name. Isaiah chapter 45, verse 1. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped. A proper name, a specific action, written 150 years before the person existed. Persia was the greatest protector the Jewish people ever had. It financed the rebuilding of the Second Temple of Jerusalem, which would stand for 580 years. It gave the Jewish people the return that the books of Ezra and Nehemiah describe as the greatest event since the Exodus. The only foreign power that Jewish tradition has historically recalled with genuine gratitude among all the empires that governed them. And today, 2,500 years later, Iran, the geographical, cultural, and nominal heir of that Persia, is the greatest declared enemy of the state of Israel, the same people, the same territory, a reversal of roles so total that it borders on the theater of the absurd. Were it not absolutely real and absolutely lethal? What happened in February of 1979 was one of the fastest political transformations of the 20th century. Ruhollah Khomeini, a 79-year-old Ayatollah who had spent 15 years in exile, recording sermons on cassette tapes smuggled into Iran, hidden in fruit cargoes, multiplied from hand to hand in bazaars and mosques, returned to Tehran on the 1st of February of that year. Some estimates speak of 6 million people in the streets that day, in a city with a total population of 4.5 million. The Islamic Republic he founded did not have political positions on Israel. It had a declared mission of theological character, the destruction of the state of Israel. The slogan, Marg Bar Israel, death to Israel in Persian, was not coined as campaign rhetorical excess. It was inscribed as state policy, as religious obligation, as doctrinal foundation of the new republic. How does a country with no border with Israel, more than 1,500 kilometers from Tel Aviv, culturally Persian and not Arab, that was the greatest protector of the Jewish people in history, become in 40 years the greatest financier of armed groups whose declared objective is to destroy Israel? The answer lies not in geography or ethnicity, It lies in a theological political construction that every Iranian government since Khomeini has maintained as an unshakable foundation. Iran patiently built what military analysts call the axis of resistance, a network of armed groups throughout the Middle East, all financed, trained, and strategically directed from Tehran, all with the same declared objective. Hezbollah was born in Lebanon in 1982, created directly by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. In 40 years, it became the most sophisticated non-state armed group in the world. It is not a militia. It is an army with conventional training, tunnel networks of a complexity rivaling national forces, and an arsenal estimated at between 150,000 and 200,000 projectiles. What does it mean for a country the size of the state of New Jersey to have 150,000 projectiles aimed at its territory from just one border? Hamas emerged in 1987 in the Gaza Strip and became its government in 2007, when it expelled the Palestinian Authority in an internal conflict with hundreds of dead. The Houthis of Yemen have controlled the capital Sana'a since 2014 and positioned themselves over the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, through which approximately 12% of all global maritime trade passes. Look at the map. Iran to the east, Hezbollah to the north with 150,000 projectiles, Hamas to the southwest, the Houthis to the south controlling the Red Sea, Israel in the center. It is the most explicitly declared and most patiently constructed siege that any country in the modern world faces. The product of 40 years of consistent strategy, financed with tens of billions of dollars, conducted with a patience that Western governments have systematically underestimated. And then came the Saturday. The siren sounded at 6:29 in the morning of October 7th, 2023. Simchat Torah, one of the most festive days of the Jewish calendar, the metallic rising sound that every Israeli knows by heart. This time, it did not stop. Approximately 3,000 Hamas fighters crossed the barrier that divides Gaza from southern Israel, cutting with blowtorches, using powered paragliders, breaking through openings made with explosives. Approximately 1,200 Israelis were killed. Families in their kibbutzim, young people at a music festival in the Negev desert, whose bodies were found the next day among the dunes. 251 people were taken as hostages into Gaza. Babies, the elderly, taken. It was the largest massacre of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. Israel's response was immediate and of a scale that Western governments found, depending on which one you listened to, necessary, excessive, or inevitable. The campaign in Gaza that followed killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, destroyed most of the infrastructure of one of the most densely populated areas in the world, and triggered a humanitarian crisis that international organizations described with the vocabulary of catastrophe. What goes through the mind of a commander who plans an attack knowing that the response will devastate his own people? The answer analysts offer is disturbing. They calculate that the destruction serves the strategic objective. Every image of a dead child in Gaza is a tool of international pressure against Israel. The suffering of Gaza, provoked by the decision to attack from within a densely populated civilian area, knowing the response that would come, is not an unwanted cost. It is a strategic asset. And then, on the night of April 13th to 14th, 2024, Iran did what it had never done in 45 years of threats. It attacked directly. 320 projectiles launched from Iranian soil, 170 long-range kamikaze drones, 30 cruise missiles, 120 ballistic missiles. A wave that took more than 3 hours to cross the airspace between Iran and Israel, passing over Iraq and Jordan, tracked in real time by American, Israeli, and regional allied systems. the largest coordinated aerial attack against a single country in the history of the modern Middle East. The United States had positioned 2 aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. American fighter jets participated in the interceptions. Israel activated the Arrow 3 system for ballistic missiles in space, the David Sling in the stratosphere, and the Iron Dome for drones at low altitude. Jordan, an Arab Muslim country, closed its airspace to the Iranian projectiles and actively participated in the interceptions. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates contributed radar information. By the end of the night, more than 99% of the projectiles had been shot down, 7 Israelis with injuries. A 7-year-old Arab-Israeli Bedouin girl struck by shrapnel, the only serious victim of an attack of 320 projectiles, an Arab child, wounded by an attack from a regime that declares itself champion of the Arab cause. The threshold had been crossed in a way that cannot be undone. Iran had, for the first time in its history as a republic, directly attacked a sovereign state. And Israel demonstrated, days later, with a precise strike on Isfahan, more than 2,000 kilometers from its territory, penetrating Iranian air defenses as though they did not exist, that the capability to reach any point in Iran was available and would be used if necessary. Iran's nuclear program adds the most dangerous layer to the calculation. According to Western estimates, Iran would have the technical capability to enrich uranium to weapons-grade level within a matter of weeks, should the political leadership give that order. And Israel has a declared doctrine since 1981, called the Begin Doctrine, that it will never permit any enemy country to obtain functional nuclear capability. In 1981, it bombed the Asirak reactor in Iraq before it became operational. In 2007, it destroyed a reactor under construction in Syria. The doctrine is not rhetoric. What does it mean when 2 countries, one with presumed nuclear capability and a declared policy of preventing enemies from obtaining the same, and the other with a declared policy of destroying the first and weeks away from having the instrument that would make that possible on a new scale? Enter a cycle of direct attacks that escalate with each round? No peace agreement has touched that route. Oslo did not touch it. Camp David did not touch it. The Abraham Accords of 2020 did not touch it. And if you notice the name chosen for those normalization agreements between Israel and Arab countries, you will understand that the very choice of name is an implicit acknowledgement, probably unintentional, that the root is older than any of those modern states, older than any border, older than any leader who ever sat at any negotiating table. Abraham died at 175 years old. And the text of Genesis chapter 25, verse 9, records that his 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac, buried him together in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron beside Sarah. 2 sons, 2 mothers, 2 radically different origin stories, 1 grave. The text does not expand that moment. It does not resolve. It does not say whether there was an embrace or only silence. It does not say whether the 2 brothers looked at each other and recognized the common tragedy of being the product of a decision neither of them had made, of a separation that no one had asked for, of a destiny that had made them brothers and rivals simultaneously. It simply records the fact they buried together the father who had loved them both in different ways, at different moments, with different consequences. The providential irony at the center of this story is this: God never said the conflict was the final destination. The prophecy about Ishmael described a pattern, not an eternity. The blessing upon Ishmael was real and was fulfilled on a historical scale. The promise about Isaac was equally fulfilled. What the biblical narrative shows with an honesty that no modern geopolitical analysis matches, is that the consequences of human decisions made out of impatience, out of fear, out of wounded pride, or out of miscalculation carry a weight that does not dissolve with time. They carry a weight that settles, accumulates, and is transmitted from generation to generation, not as a magical curse, but as a structure of identity. Who we are, who the others are, what was taken from us, what was promised to us. And the story of Iran, the Persia that freed the Jews, that financed the rebuilding of the temple, that was mentioned by name in a prophecy written 150 years before it existed, turned 2,500 years later into the greatest declared enemy of the same people, is the most precise demonstration that this conflict obeys none of the logics that the modern world uses to analyze wars. It is not about oil. It is not only about territory. It is not about democracy versus theocracy. It is about something said in a tent, recorded in a text, passed through more than 150 generations without losing its verifiable precision. When the world asks why this conflict never ends, it is asking the right question with the wrong tools. The tools governments use, diplomacy, sanctions, UN resolutions, were built for conflicts born of causes those tools can reach. This conflict was born of something no Secretary of State reaches by private jet, that no G7 summit puts on the agenda, that no intelligence report classifies with precision, because the category it would require does not exist in the forms they use. The conflict you follow in the news is not from the 21st century. It did not begin on October 7th, 2023. It did not begin in 1948. It is the oldest conflict humanity has in written record. And the question the child placed under a bush in the desert of Beersheba, planted at the center of human history 4,000 years ago, has still not found an answer that any general, any diplomat, and any head of state on any side has been able to formulate with credibility. 4,000 years of blood. And the text that described all of this is still there, with the same words, waiting for the world to stop treating the problem as though it began in the last century.